Up bright and early. I really appreciate it. As a not morning person, I extra appreciate it. And I have a really fun ride for you today. Instead of going into where I went to school with my history, I'm just going to show you a bunch of stuff. So I'm a person who loves to play with technology, and I just have to get my hands on it. So I'm going to show you a few projects. You know, a few years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I was really obsessed with RFID tags. So I started putting RFID tags in everything. I was invited to do an installation in the south of France. And this is what I did.
Oh.
So each of the eggs is spread throughout this cave in the nooks and crannies of rocks, and people have to hold them and place them into a bowl in the middle of the room that has the reader. I was invited to do a kind of clean white box gallery version of this. And so I created a different kind of egg that was appropriate for the environment, but still with the RFID tag, with each sound having an identity. Here's a little clip from that. This was my favorite visitor. She really deliberates over which one. And then about a year ago, I was doing a residency here in New York at the School of Visual Arts and collaborating with food designer Emily Baltz. And I was obsessed at this point with capacitive sensing, kind of like when we have our touch screens. And figuring out what were all the things we could put capacitive sensing into. Since Emily's a food designer, we started playing around with every kind of food and decided we would create an ice cream orchestra.
Yes, me.
There are sensors at the bottom of the cup. When the ice cream touches the sensor, the ice cream becomes the conductive material. We had 4 people in boxes. We made sure they were in boxes so they could only use their tongues. And then we kind of conducted them and we worked with a really great composer, Aaron Dyer, who did a 4-part harmony specifically for ice cream. A few years before that, I did a residency at the Museum of Arts and Design around the idea of manipulating objects so that the objects themselves are the interface. You're not going to a screen for anything, but you're just using sound and motion. This is something I call the matrix mask, which is kind of like a robot mask. So you talk into it, and then there are animated lips at the end of it. Hello. Hello? Yeah.
Usually it comes up because I can see.
Oh, yeah.
Benjamin. I don't know.
So that's a kind of fun interface because the person using it doesn't actually see what's happening outside it, but they can see the reactions of the people who are looking at the interface. But today we're going to talk about robots. So any look into the future and wanting to play with the future definitely involves robots. So I want to just take a step back and talk about how I got to where I am. So lately I've been calling myself a maker futurist. I didn't start this way. I started out as a mechanical engineer and worked for many years at some of the top firms, more recently for the last 7 years at Smart Design, where I always made sure that I let everyone know that I was really passionate about physical objects that had some kind of electronic components. So people often know Smart for the OXO line, but there were a lot of other designs that we worked on. So I tended to work on things like appliances and cameras and car interiors and medical devices. I left a couple of years ago because I really, really wanted to focus just on the very future-specting things. But I still do take on client projects. Last year I worked with a firm called Zinc, and we did a pregnancy monitor, which is coincidental, I'm pregnant. Work doesn't affect you that much. So this was the device that we developed that's currently in beta. And then while I was at Smart, I created what's called the Smart Interaction Lab, which you can see at smartinteractionlab.com. Because I realized that what was most exciting to me was actually the speculative aspects of the work. Not so much fixing today's problems, but trying to see what tomorrow's might be. So the lab is a way for designers and engineers to have an outlet to experiment. And then since I've been future-specting, there have been a lot of opportunities to really observe things and then tell stories about them. And I've been finding more and more that this is what I enjoy in my practice. So I've been doing a lot more talks like this one and a lot more writing. Most recently, I did a piece on wearables for Core 77. And I've also been teaching. So I created some of the first Smart Objects courses here at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and right now I am teaching at the University of Pennsylvania. I've also done smaller versions of the course. I just came back from Costa Rica a month ago and I did a compressed 2-week version of it. And we just wrapped it up actually a couple of days ago. So this is Kai Evanson, one of the students in my University of Pennsylvania Smart Objects course, with his connected pillow. It's called Pillow Glow. And you make a hug, and the hug sends a message that gets transmitted wirelessly to a loved one. And there's a whole buddy system around the messages and the pillows. So this has been just really wonderful fun for me to explore with my students. How do I do this? How am I envisioning the future? So I'm really extrapolating what's real to imagine what doesn't exist yet. And one of the ways that I do this is I do really keep close contact with researchers and academia. So I have been at Georgia Institute of Technology in the past. Now I'm at University of Pennsylvania, and I always seem to finagle my way into the labs of the people who are doing some really, really intensive research. So when I was at Georgia Tech, I managed to meet Andrea Tomaz, who had been a PhD student with Cynthia Brazil, who was really one of the pioneers, if not the ultimate pioneer, of a field called social robotics, which is a field that didn't even exist before she started doing it. This was one of the first social robots called Kismet. And the entire purpose of the robot is to study how we as humans might interact with machines. Kismet was followed by Leonardo. You can kind of see the evolution. And for Leonardo, the team hired Stan Winston Studios, a Hollywood studio, and they had a leather nose and yak hair and eyelashes, and you can still see this robot at the MIT Museum, and it's remarkable. But children ran screaming from the room. Adults were really creeped out, and it fell into something that the robot researchers call the uncanny valley, which is something that approaches to be so real, and then all of a sudden it becomes creepy. So when Andrea Tomaz, who's at Georgia Tech, was starting her own lab, she said, we're going to have to manage those expectations and let people know it's still a machine. I want to work with an industrial designer. And I was lucky enough to be that industrial designer. And we created Simon. So I worked with the team, and we said, should it have ears? Should it not have ears? Is it hair? Is it a helmet? And the result was the robot that you see here. And again, the purpose is really to study how we might interact with machines. Instead of having to use a keypad or a button or some kind of artificial interface, you just approach the robot, and the robot also approaches you in waves. So these are some of Simon's expressions. He's kind of looking cool, he's looking bored down there, and he's looking curious over there. And the way that Simon works is he's got cameras in his eyes, he's got microphones, he's got pads in his hands, and that's how he takes input from the world. So here's a video where Simon is learning colors. So someone says, Simon, take this. And Simon says, sure. And then she says, where does it go? He says it goes in the red bin. So he puts it in the red bin. So he's making the closest color correlation and putting it in the red bin. I'm going to show you another video. And in this video, what's happening is, what Simon does is he can listen for a sentence and he can parse out where the color will be. And if he doesn't recognize the word for the color, he will learn it. So he will actually say, I don't know. And you'll say, well, that's green. And then Simon will say, okay. So here you'll see him hold up a green bottle and do this kind of like, I don't know gesture. So here it is. But you get the picture. Since then, I've been continuing to collaborate with Dr. Tamaz's lab, which is called the Socially Intelligent Machines Lab. We developed a cousin last year. So it brought up the question, what does a cousin look like? So, and this is the Curie. We crowdsourced the name. So the name came out to be Curie. So Curie's similar to Simon, but slightly different. There's more of a mouth indication, the ears are round. And this is Curie from a recent workshop that we did, just going through an exercise cycle, a sample cycle. But I think it looks a little like Tai Chi. I really kind of like this video. Oh, and there's Dr. Tamaz.
I think there's something more going on there.
So this is some of my favorite work of all, but there are not, dozens and dozens of necessarily this type of robot. And I don't actually necessarily envision this robot as the thing that we have in our homes every day. What I envision instead are aspects of this. So when we were designing Simon, we did not have lights in the ears. And at one point I went and spoke to our engineer, Jonathan Holmes, and I said, could we put lights in there? And we said, yeah, well, it'll be another aspect of expression. And we didn't know quite how we would use it. Andrew's got a fabulous team of PhD students working on the artificial intelligence. These projects don't happen without big teams. And what they did is they used it as a way to confirm that the robot had actually seen the color with the color exercise. So this really magical moment happened the first time I had seen Simon totally assembled, and he looked at the object, and I said, where does this go? Because I was doing the sorting exercise, and his ears turned the same color as the object I had held him, and I kind of got goosebumps because I felt like, oh my gosh, Simon knows what I'm thinking. And it was really a remarkable moment, and I felt like, as a designer, I need to create objects, even if they're just sort of a microphone, but if I want my microphone to move, it needs to somehow interact with me and shrug and be shy or confirm or light up. So since then I've really been trying to incorporate these. Now these are obviously not my designs, but some elements of this that you might see in your everyday life. Or for example, the breathing light that's been on some of the older Mac Power books pulses at 12 pulses per minute. Apple actually has a patent on that as a breathing response because it mimics our breath patterns. Jambox by Jawbone also does like a really remarkable job of having sound be the main thing that is your interface, but in a really human way, where it'll say, your battery's running down, charge me now. If any of you have used the Polycom conferencing system, there are these really subtle gestures where, it can actually recognize faces and be focusing on people. And when it's not in use, it does this really beautiful thing where it kind of spins around and hides its head. So you know it's not looking at you, and you know it's not part of the room conversation. And so those are the kind of subtle little moments that I'm always trying to incorporate. So a few years ago, I was approached by the New York Times. I had done a talk in the art department, and they said, we love the way that you kind of think about this stuff. Would you do an article for us? So I wrote a piece that was on the cover of the Sunday Review in 2013 called Talking Walking Objects. And as part of the piece, they let me do this silly video, which wasn't silly. We looked at a few different ways to make this happen. But we kind of settled on this really childlike drawing. This artwork is by Katie Turner. And it sort of represents this idea that I'm talking about. So I'll show you a little of it.
I'm Carla, and this is a day in the near future. Another Monday morning, and my lamp has just gone from dim to bright. I try to turn over, but it rotates to follow me. I stumble into the bathroom. I brush one side for a while. Bzzz! The toothbrush vibrates, so I know it's time to switch to the other side. Now I'm really awake. The bathroom mirror says, "Nice job on your weight, but your heart rate is a little higher than yesterday." As I head to work, my bike confirms my appointment. On our way to Ted's office? Yes! When it's time to turn, my handlebar vibrates and my jacket lights up to signal a left turn. At the meeting, I draw some sketches with my memory pen. When we're done, it emails my notes to my colleagues. Back at home, the door recognizes me. The lights turn on, the stereo starts playing, and my 3D printer whistles to let me know the dog toy I downloaded earlier for Rue is ready.
So it kind of goes on, gets a little bit more fantastical. I still can't quite believe the New York Times let me do silly robot voices, but it happened. One of the projects I worked on at Smart Design, one of my first projects was actually a robot, and I had just come from Georgia Tech, and I said, oh, I'm so excited. So I really worked hard with the CEO of the company, they're called Nito Robotics, to emphasize how important building personality and expression would be in this robot. It's a floor cleaning robot, like you might be familiar with the Nito or you might be familiar with the Roomba. And we really worked hard. And one of the things I did was hire a composer. I worked with a fellow named Scooby Leposki. And so in addition to the robot itself, it actually has facial expressions. It will light up. It will let you know if it's upset because it's stuck under the couch. It will let you know if it's happy because it's just finished doing it. It will let you know if it's going to sleep. It actually does this little animation of eyes going to sleep. And then in addition to that, I made sure that we had this really appropriate palette of sounds. So here are some of the sounds. This lets you know that cleaning has begun, and that's when cleaning is done. And that's hello. Oh, hello. And these are some of the, oh, kind of something's going wrong. And that's the waking up. And then here's goodbye. So I really love that, and I really love working with teams where we're all thinking about this kind of really human language. How do we take machine talk and translate it into what I call humanese? And so here's this is just some of the early prototypes. This is one that shows you facial expression. And then there were a few different modes. Here we were actually kind of playing with different things. We have one that goes into these bubbles. But this was recently part of the Beautiful User Show at the Cooper Hewitt. If any of you saw that, you may have been able to play with the interface. So then I built out the flow and made sure to bring these moments and these expressions, even in the flow chart that looks sort of very techy, but make it all very about these human messages. And this is what the final product looks like. In the future, they plan to incorporate the LED matrix.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that fictional robots need to be designed too. So a few years ago, I got really excited about 3D printing. I had used 3D printing as a professional, but when I saw the desktop 3D printer movement coming into being, I felt like this is a story. This is something I want to do a project about. And my alma mater, which is here in New York called the Marymount School for Girls, actually put in a fab lab with 5 3D printers and a laser cutter and all this fantastic stuff. And I was consulting with them a little bit. They said, should we do this or should we do a fab lab? I don't even remember what this was. I said, do the fab lab. This could be great. So and then I thought, you know, it's so great the way kids understand the potential of 3D printing. And I said, I have to do a project or something. And you know, I said, well, I have to make things. But then I thought, I can figure out a way to do a writing project and make things. So I wrote a book that's called Leo the Maker Prints. And in the book are a series of objects that readers can download and 3D print while they're reading the book or after they've read the book. And I built in all of the possible futures that I was seeing. So I interviewed researchers and asked them, like, where do we see 3D printing in the future? And what was really important about designing this robot was actually using the robot's anatomy as a way to teach kids how 3D printing works. So there's a heated nozzle, which is his tail. He's got this tray that can go above his head. He can scan things with his eyes. He's got a spool of filament on his back. And you know, these were some of the explorations I did with my apprentice, Alexa Forney, and we would draw and draw and draw. And ultimately, if you see the drawing at the top right, you know, what I've realized is it's all about the relationship again. It's about this gesture. It's about being able to present this tray and say, this is your final product. So the book's about a young woman named Carla who meets a robot named Leo. She's never seen 3D printing before. He says, draw me a sheep, which is my homage, of course, to the Little Prince. And then it kind of explains the way 3D printing works. And so what I'm doing is turning fictional objects into real ones. And you know, I tried to explore all the possible futures. So we have customization, we have prototyping, we have a 3D printer at home, 3D printed food. So there are robots that I got to design throughout the book, because each of these possible futures has a robot. This is Sinclair 10, which sits in your home. This is Hi-Ho, which is a factory robot, because Stephanie's a jewelry designer. This is Iris 7, who scans Nathan's feet, because he lives near the beach, and he needs perfectly fitting sandals. He also gets to pick what kind of footprint he wants to leave. Emily and Claudette. Claudette is the chef robot. So I collaborated with the Cornell Creative Machine Lab to talk about food printing. And then this is Charles and Nixie. And they do 3D printed architecture. And the characters can also be downloaded and printed. So I had this amazing surprise this morning. The team at Thingiverse actually printed me a large version of Carla. So that was a fabulous surprise. And you know, the most fun about this project, the most fun thing was that readers have been taking this and making their own versions. And here's just a few of them. But you know, what's also been happening is that they've been taking these fictional objects, making them real, and then putting them back into fiction. And so this little girl, I was on Thingiverse, and the caption said, Arya builds a house for the sheep. The sheep doesn't even have a house in the story. It's great. This is my favorite, because there's something nefarious going on in the background. So somebody made sure to stage that. This is a teacher from Virginia who loves to use Leo and Carla to tell stories. He says Leo also prints in snow. Here's Carla inside the 3D printer. But this was the most remarkable thing. A library in Scotland wrote me an email and said, we just wanted to let you know we're the first library to have a 3D printer, and we've been using your book with visually impaired and blind children so that we can read the story and then they can hold the characters and they can actually experience what they can't see in the illustrations. So I really love that story, and it's made me more and more excited about doing projects that are out in the world that are shared with others, where people can use their own robots. So I'm over time, and I wanted to just share something fun. I just recently was approached by the Cooper Hewitt Museum. They said, well, we do these workshops for kids. Can we let everybody build a robot? Which was pretty challenging. But what I wound up doing was designing this robot. It's got a little switch with a paper clip, so if it were to run into a wall, it would shut itself off. And it just uses a vibrating motor. So here's some of the kids having fun with that.
Mine's going into the middle. Goes back on there.
And that's all. So I hope you all have a great day.